Welcome, everyone. I'm Jeromin Zettelmeyer. I'm the director of Rugel, and it is my really great pleasure to host for the second time in the last 12 months Teresa Ribera. She is, of course, the Executive Vice President of the Commission for the Clean, Just, and Competitive Transition. I memorized those three words as I was coming up the elevator with her. I think they're actually well taken, those three words. So we had the great honor of having Teresa almost immediately after she took office in January in one of her first speeches. And that, of course, preceded some important documents of the Commission, like the competitiveness compass. And so it was mostly, I would say, a 30,000-foot view of how Teresa viewed her role. We are now almost a year later. There has been really a flurry of activity and documents. No one can excuse the Commission, particularly not Teresa, of having been inactive. We've also had, probably the biggest foreign policy challenge that the Commission has and Europe as a whole have had to deal with for many years, and Teresa was right in the middle of it. And it is, the reason why she has been in the middle of it, in a sense, characterizes this challenge and distinguishes it from previous challenges, because it is one that immediately affected our internal regulatory and, if you like, way of life choices. Including the green transition. And so we are here now to essentially look back on this very tumultuous year, but also to look forward and basically see how what we will hear from Teresa is different from what she told us in January. I expect it to be consistent, but I expect it to also tell us a bit more. So without further ado, I will welcome her to give her keynote. We will then have Simone moderate a little chat between the three of us, and then you will get also a chance to ask questions. Teresa, please. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Jeromin, and thanks a lot, Simone, and thanks a lot to you all. I have to confess that when I got the title of this session, Europe at a moment of truth, I felt a little bit nervous. And then I started to think, how many times in history Europe could have been thinking that it was a real moment of truth? And I identified three great moments of truth. 1957, the Treaty of Rome is signed. We come up to say we want a peaceful and prosperous Europe based on these premises. 1989, the fall of the wall. Europe may have a chance to be united. 1992, the official integration coming from a market towards an union. And then I thought, what is the moment of truth of today? And I said, oh my God, these three moments of truth were moments of hope, moments of optimism, moments of rationality, passion, being dedicated to build the European dream. So what is the moment of truth of today? And what we look around, what we see around, is gloomy landscapes, fear, lacks of confidence on our own strengths. I was also thinking about when I stepped in, and I would like to share with you that one of the people I talked to before even knowing that or being public, that I could have this nice title and I could be in charge of competition and facilitating, supporting my colleagues dealing with the green agenda, was jump pisanifery. It was end of August 2024. We had a very nice and warm conversation on the challenges for Europe, on how to proceed and how we could work. And I felt a warm welcome and support from his end. And then I felt a bit sad when reading on his speech when he was going to be recognized with the Légion d'honneur last September, a little bit more than a year after our meeting, a few months after the meeting that Jeromin was commenting a few minutes ago, saying, I have dedicated my life to three things that seem so difficult today and where we are rolling back: open markets, European integration, and environmental protection. So my first comment is, so if we are going to talk about the moment of truth, how we can ensure that we can build the very same hope and optimism in a context where everything seems to be much more complicated than a year ago. And yes, I have a very nice speech that has been crafted together with my team to speak through the eyes, through the lens of the competition aspects related to this very real, relevant reality of today of Europe. And I am very lucky because one of the elements of hope that we still count on very good, professional and committed people to the European project and within the European institutions and within the European think tanks and other constituencies that understand that it is very important that this moment of truth becomes the moment where we overcame the difficulties that in the past also happened. And today we look a little bit to me, but we have good reasons why to be optimistic and to fight for our values, our identity, and our soul. Yes, Europe faces a moment of truth, but moments of truth are also moments of choice. So let's take the right choices. This is a time to take the reins, to protect what defined the European project, to modernize our economy, to ensure that our values remain a source of strength, to stand up and to overcome that fear, those challenges, being true to what we identify as our own project. With that in mind, as I said, I would like to look at these questions through the lens of the competition policy with broader eyes, but being dedicated most of my comments to this relevant role that we can still play through competition, coming from a market towards an union, coming from freedoms related to this market towards the freedoms of the Europeans and the citizenship, whatever it is the status of what we may call citizenship in Europe and freedoms in Europe. But much has been achieved, and we have the obligation to defend it and to keep on building on those strengths. We don't have the right to stay frightened, looming, or to allow others to impose their reality. So, yes, I think that competition policy may well be the sharpest instrument that still can help into this European model. Competitiveness has become a keyword. And I was reading the other day that for many Europeans it is not clear what it means. Competitiveness, simplification, what does it relate to my day-to-day life? That's a problem. Competitiveness, competition, rights of the people, how we can be able, capable to innovate, to lead truly to lead there where we understand that everything began and where we can keep on building things. We should not fall into the temptation of many of those things that are being imposed as a means to improve competitiveness, but that in fact derail the European soul and the European competitiveness. For instance, talking about deregulation. If we could accept this temptation, we risk undoing the European project and favoring again 27 national realities there where we counted on a single standard that could apply all over the continent. It is also true that we should remain vigilant and to avoid the temptation to say, please allow me to use my pockets, and entering into a kind of subsidy race between member states that could again undermine the very basics of the origin of the source of the European project. Equal treatment, fairness, are key operating elements in competition. Companies cannot compete on a level playing field if some are allowed to bypass environmental, labor, or consumer protections. In fact, these are the reasons why we develop common standards across Europe. It is the reason why we move from a purely market freedoms approach towards something that could build on that, what it was provided, on that thing that was provided back in 1992. If pollution is not addressed, citizens pay through their health and their taxes. If labor protections are ignored, communities pay through lower wages and weaker services. If dominant digital platforms restrict access, everyone pays through higher prices and less innovation. So a broader understanding of a single market based on what we identified as high quality and citizens' rights was the magic approach that Delors was able to promote. And as I said, it is our turn not only to defend it, but to keep on building on those magical approaches being adopted back in 1992. A broader understanding of a single market based in hidden cost that could distort competition and erode trust cannot be accepted. A broader understanding on a single market that builds on values is the way that we can keep on proceeding. Think for a moment about the economics and the geopolitics of today. The green and the digital agendas are not small details anymore, are not details aside the fundamentals. They are part of the fundamentals of the economy and the geopolitical challenges. This points out to new challenges, as for instance, how we can work internally and internationally to ensure an increasing synergy and coherence on a well-functioning green and smart economy able to provide wealth everywhere. We have worked so much and in such a committed manner that it may be truth that sometimes we may end with very complicated regulation. So, it is normal that there may be lots of people asking for simplification. Simplifying rules is not the same as weakening protections or giving up on regulation. Europe may need to be faster, predictable. We may need to provide an easier framework to navigate. Simplification could mean avoiding duplications, aligning procedures, speeding up and improving clarity. But what it doesn't mean is lowering our standards, our protection. What it doesn't mean is transforming there where there is a single rule to be applied in the whole continent into 27 national reactions. What it does not mean is to lower the protections that guarantee fairness and long-term competitiveness, that go against something which is very precious in the treaty, high our commitment to high quality life for European citizens. The regulation is something different. The regulation eliminates safeguards, shifts costs onto citizens and taxpayers, creates uncertainty, discourages investment. It's a kind of Trumpist approach against being stable, reliable, and predictable. It weakens our standards. It lowers the credibility of the single market. It enlarges inequalities and distortions. So the reasons why we needed those regulations into place remain valid. And around the world, major players are reshaping industrial and technological landscapes with subsidies, strategic investments, assertive regulation. Why? We are going to weaken our own capacity to compete in that context. We should compete for higher standards, higher quality of life, not for lowering this quality of life. If we were to respond by lowering these standards, we could be giving our soul an identity. We could be losing and undo our social economic model. We could be missing and undermining the European project as such. Our standards are one of our strongest assets for competitiveness, for reliability, for stability, and for trust. So I think that keeping and defending these standards is keeping and building on opportunities, ensuring fair transitions, protecting people from widening inequalities, addressing the challenges that we may be facing in this given context, but doing it with our own principles and our own understanding of the European soul. Competition policy remains a cornerstone. It's one of the sharpest instruments, as I say, to protect the foundations of our prosperity model. We are modernizing our tools with a clear compass: fairness, transparency, consumer welfare, equal conditions for all companies, because the context has changed worldwide. Global subsidies are reshaping value chains. As I said, we see how everything is being weaponized, how digital platforms hold unprecedented control over data and market access, how the green agenda is accelerating industrial change all over the world. So we took the message being given by different stakeholders to say, please do update stated rules to support green industrial investment happening as fast as possible. And while we are examining how our environmental and social impacts can be reflected carefully and objectively in competition analysis. Digital markets shape how citizens access to information, how business operates, and how innovation emerges. Dominant platforms can restrict access, raise cost, and suppress competition. So these are new declinations of the very same intentions behind what we tried to reflect in the European construction process. This is why we develop modern digital rules that promote transparency, fairness, and accountability. This is why we try to apply this new regulation equally to all companies operating in Europe, whether European or non-European. This is why many of our recent investigations were triggered by concerns raised by companies coming from outside the European Union, because they rely on our capacity to address their concerns. Some of them, many of them, coming from the United States, showing that our framework is predictable and trusted, and that business rely on European rules to ensure fair access to markets. And I could add, this is why I'm happy to read this morning in Politico that Mr. Greer expressed his intentions not to blackmail on our Digital Markets Act and our sovereign capacity to regulate on digital markets. That's good. With the same objective of preserving open and contestable markets, I would like to announce something that apparently has been announced this morning in the Financial Times. Today, we are opening proceedings to assess whether Meta may be abusing a dominant position by restricting the ability of competing AI assistants to operate on WhatsApp. WhatsApp appears to be one of these important entry points for artificial intelligence apps, and we need to ensure that the startups and newcomers in the artificial intelligence field have a fair chance to reach consumers and compete with the established big tech players. This is a standard. This is impartial enforcement action under the European rules. This is an example on how staying true to our soul, to our capacity, to our values, we may help on developing our own strengths, how we can modernize our understanding of what is our choice in this moment of truth, because our objective is the same. Our European dream remains. The Europe's moment of truth is not a choice between ambition or subordination. It is an opportunity to reinforce what works, strong criteria, strong values, deepening single market that delivers for the citizens, competition policy that helps into competitiveness while preventing abuse of power against consumers and citizens. Defending these principles is not ideological. It is part of our fundamental mission. It is part of the treaty, of our own constitutional values. It is the way to ensure that Europe can innovate, attract investment, and protect its social and economic model. So, a clean, just, and competitive Europe needs to be possible. So, we need to stand up. So, we need to identify that the real moment of truth is to be ready to defend and explain why we care, why it's worthy, why it's valuable, and why we have the strengths to ensure prosperity for the time to come, unless we feel so frightened and subordinated that we give up. And very honestly, that's not our role, that's not our mission, that's what we cannot afford. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Executive Vice President, for what I think was a very rich intervention and, of course, extremely timely. I have four main takeaways from what you just said. I think you started with a very clear recognition about the current environment we live in Europe these days, a sort of lack of confidence that is characterizing much of our public policy debate, given the geopolitical tensions around us. But you, I think, highlighted extremely well the fact that we have good reasons to be optimistic and to fight for our values. I think you stressed in a very compelling manner the role of competition policy as the sharpest instrument we have to navigate the difficult waters we are currently in, and you made a very timely and relevant example at the end of your speech. And I think you particularly stressed the centrality of the green and digital transitions in today's economics, but also geopolitics, and the difference, which I don't think is to be taken for granted, between simplification, which we need, and deregulation, which would actually weaken our key assets for competitiveness. So I think this really gives us a framework for a very insightful conversation. And maybe to start this conversation, I will turn to you, Jeromin, if you want to give a first reaction to all what we heard, and then we will move into discussion.
No, I got it. All good. Thank you so much. Great. Thanks so much, Teresa. It was really good to hear. And you know, it was good to hear because, you know, defense of principles is actually Well, we did defend our principles, say, after the Munich Security Conference and that challenge, right? But along the course of the year, I think this stuff has eroded a bit. And I think, you know, the general direction of travel, even in Europe, has been one of essentially realpolitik, where we adjust to the latest pressures, and where we also are increasingly taking the view that if others break principles, so should we, right? So that's been sort of the general direction of travel. And so it's very, very good to hear you reassert principles. You know, some people might call it ideology. For me, they are, in fact, principles, because they're at a very general level, and the consensus backing them is very wide. Now, my main concern is, do you think, I know this may be a difficult question to answer, and, you know, feel free to blame your colleagues at the European Commission, but do you think that we have actually walked the walk on the things that you said? So I'm concerned on effectively in three areas, right? One is that when it comes to defending our principles versus the outside world, you know, you have been one of the bravest voices, not just now, but also in the course of the year, but we have had instances of caving. Second, within Europe, there has been a rush to review regulation in the form of the omnibus packages, which I do not think can be completely described as simplification. And they cannot even be described as well thought out deregulation. They can be described mainly as an attempt to reduce the scope of applicable regulation very quickly without a fundamental reform. So I would say some of it, in Omnibus 1 in particular, is just poorly done deregulation. And then, and I know you were not responsible for that, but another area where I'm concerned is state aid rules. So you did emphasize common standards and competition as being critical, but I'm worried that, in fact, on state aid, we have gone too far. And I can see why we have had to go there. So the Draghi report really emphasized the importance of supporting energy-intensive industry because they are the hardest to abate. So unless we deal with that problem, we're not going to get the green transition done. But of course, we have no central money to do this support consistently, so ultimately we do it through weaker state aid. But it is, I think, an area of concern, not so much because of the green transition. So my sense that in this sort of trade-off, and I think there is a trade-off, it's not always sort of mutually self-reinforcing between economic security, achieving the green transition, and competitiveness. If anything, the Commission has erred on the side of disregarding the competitiveness part, because, you know, defense of particular industry then may come at the expense of competition, and it may come at the expense of enabling changes in industrial structure, such as, for example, reducing the degree to which we do energy-intensive industry in a highly energy-poor continent, that ultimately hurts competitiveness more broadly, even if it helps these industries. So I'm sort of blurting out all these concerns. You know, just react to any bit of this, or none, if you want.
Thank you. These are fantastic general ways to blow up different questions that are part of the public discussion, I would say in a very fair manner, because I think that we all see the different tensions around these topics. Just to start on the first set of questions dealing with this omnibus technique that we have been developing. There was this strong expectation. Please do come and simplify. Make it easy, with the same goals and the same purposes. And I would say that this is not an easy task. But then the Commission tried, and it is not an easy task internally either, but we tried to say, okay, let's identify in a very targeted manner where we may simplify things, knowing that, in fact, much of the complication does relate to the overlappings between different layers of administration decisions or different readings when transposing an European directive, so it is not directly related to the European regulation package. But let's try to enter into this very targeted approach on what may be simplified. And then we open a conversation with the co-regulators that ends, we don't know very well where. It is a, I would say, terrible political spectacle. And in too many occasions, we have the sense that it is not simplification, but messy combination of things that end in uncertainty. So yes, I think that this is something sufficiently relevant to be taken into consideration for the time to come. It's not that we are going to go back to the starting point. That could be very difficult also. And the engagement to simplify remains. But we may think differently what we do and how we do. Maybe we can work in level 2 regulation. Maybe we can provide guidelines. Maybe we can push politically the need to go into a much more deeper single market and different unions, telecom, energy, banking, and so on and so on. So again, this is what is the political ambition to do so, or how we can facilitate this political ambition to come up. Because for the time being, the sense is that it is much more defensive and fear than trust on our own capabilities and possibilities to go forward. So I'm combining, pragmatic realism with a broader sense of how we can help to build a different reality. That is dealing back with this simplification exercise and these techniques that have been developed and that are being challenged. Because one thing is to get through targeted modifications with no impact assessments and no broader participation, and a very different thing is to end in who knows what. And I think that we need to be much more serious on how we handle this goal without undermining our own capacities. Then we enter into the state aid that you were commenting. Well, in fact, I think that state first, as a convinced pro-European person, I would love to count on a much more united version of a budget that can combine different tools and different capacities independently of the size of the pockets of each member state. That's for sure. At the very same time, it is true that we need to accelerate a transformation that if it is only through the market conditions may take longer, or there may be failures within the market that need to be addressed or could be justifying addressing them through a state aid. So the premises need to be there. And that means that it is not just pay on the cost of energy for your business if you have the money full stop, but how we can provide the support to transition into something that could upgrade the way we produce. Or eventually, to what extent there may be short-term and very short-term conditions with a time limit to provide some support to the energy consumption, the cost of the energy consumption for some industries, in a very transparent manner and according to the very same rules for everybody. That's what it is intended to happen, drawing from the lessons that we could identify as takeaways from the previous experience in the energy crisis or the COVID recovery. So I think that this is what it is intended to happen, and this was why we thought that it was much better to come up with this upfront guidance on what could be accepted, under which conditions, and to put pressure to ensure that this will not happen beyond that. No, that's the reality of the stated framework for the clean industrial deal.
Allow me just one follow-up on this. So I think the quote-unquote loosening of the state aid framework can be justified as a sort of second-best policy, right? So, clearly, first, there is a strong case for some degree of subsidization of decarbonization of the energy-intensive industry because it is so costly to them and the social benefits are so high. So it will not happen without a breakdown on this industry if there are no subsidies. So I take that point. And I also take the point that the Commission doesn't have enough money to do this centrally. So if you accept those two premises, clearly the only way out is some loosening of the state aid framework, and that's the route you took. I still think you may have gone too far, and tell me whether you see that risk in two ways. First, what I did not expect to see in the state framework is an endorsement of the principle that subsidies can happen by subsidizing energy prices. So, we have tended to believe that keeping energy prices near the market level is an essential signal to guiding the energy transition. And the second thing that I find a bit disturbing about this framework is the idea that energy intensity per se provides a rationale for subsidies. And the reason why that, provided of course it is accompanied by decarbonization efforts, right? So that conditionality is there. And the reason why I'm concerned about this is because maintaining energy-intensive industry in Europe as much as possible is probably the wrong thing to do in a continent that will be energy poor, even in relative terms, in the foreseeable future. And some structural adjustment away from energy intensity probably has to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it does come at the cost of competitiveness of the economy as a whole, because someone has to bear that cost, right, of higher energy prices because we're trying to keep the energy intensives here. Now, I'm not blaming you per se for this. I'm actually blaming Draghi mostly because this discussion is not in the Draghi report. But you sort of took it over in an uncritical way, and the result, I think, is something where in the very laudable attempt of keeping the green transition on the road, right? I think that's what's driving everything. You may have disregarded a little bit the competitive part of your triangle of objectives. So maybe you can react to this, and then Simone will ask you a much nicer question after that.
Simone, I'm waiting for you. No. No, you can blame me. I mean, I think that's part of the pleasure of being here. How we can exchange views and update with ideas and elements that can contribute to have a broader understanding. Because I agree with part of what you have said, and I disagree with some other parts of what you have said. And allow me to go through different pieces to respond to your questions. I was commenting the other day with my team, very relevant data being reflected in the Financial Times on what was the share of the GDP being dedicated to investment in the biggest three economies, US, Europe, and China, in the last 12 years. And to what extent this blaming to China, in fact, is very shortly related to that part of the GDP that is connected to exports, which is lower than 3%. So only 3% of the GDP of China, GDP growth, may be related to exports, but it is mainly related to domestic demand and investments in the wrong ground. Knowing that, in fact, they are saying that they want to boost their internal market. So it's good to feel that we are still a reference to create dreams, inspirations, and aspirations and that that should make us think that, in fact, we should inspire by our own developments instead of being crying in a corner. Because, well, China has been investing around 40% of their GDP in the last 10 years, while we Europeans have been investing less than 20%, and only 3.5% of the GDP coming from public investment. So yes, if we want to transform our economy, if we take into consideration that the production of goods in many cases requires energy, and we cannot rely on something that we do not produce to become competitive. If we have been able to identify that, in fact, being green, smart, efficient, and take into consideration the environmental, which are physical, limits, in order to boost this innovation and solutions to create goods and services and to provide those things that may be demanded by our own societies, we should think on what drivers could help into this taking place. So homegrown energy, hard physical infrastructure that could allow us to drive this big industrial hub of services, industrial hub and services hub around this big transformation, so to facilitate this and to ensure that this becomes a reality. And I think that that is the strategic approach that we need to back, and that means opening a conversation on how much we are still paying the consequence of deciding on a type of discipline that in fact kills the capacity to keep on improving the quality of our economy and the modernization of our economy and the creation of the wealth for the time to come, which is a different conversation from the conversation that you have tried to raise. I come back to the conversation that you have tried to raise. Well, I think that certainly the demand of those products that come from the basic energy-intense industry will not remain very high and will not keep on rising for the time to come. We are living in modern economies that are not so demanding of this type of goods, and this type of goods may be demanded elsewhere, even though there will be a demand. And it could be important to count on steel and aluminium, things that could be relevant for the new realities and the new products and equipments that would be required. And it is good to have a much more balanced approach, healthy approach to what it is global and global value chains and what is what we can produce in a closer context. So I could not prejudge how much of this energy-intense industry should remain in Europe or how much it should go away. But I'm sure that there is a need to count on part of this production in the surroundings and not so far ago. The thing is that, yes, we need to decarbonize this setting. Yes, we need to count on a different energy system. Yes, we can count on this. We have the sun and the wind and the water and the seas to provide new sources of energy, and that is part of the innovation to be driven. So it is not that we say, okay, we are going to subsidize whatever at whatever price. It is not, and that is something that I had to fight in my previous life, how we can ensure that the energy regulation and the energy markets do evolve towards something that is meaningful and that provides the references, the signals to get into what we want to achieve. And yes, of course, we cannot subsidize everything forever, but what we try to think is how we can ensure the financial bridge into something that should be different in a given time. And if we need to think how we can bridge these realities of today towards the realities of tomorrow, financial products and instruments, but eventually the involvement of the public money could be justified. Much better if it is collectively managed and not just depending on the pocket of each one.
So maybe just to summarize, so the way I understand you is coming back is saying, first, we need a huge investment push, particularly in this area, and we are more likely to get this with the state aid framework than without. Second, it's only temporary anyway, And third, you know, the underlying forces for restructuring are so strong that we will see some restructuring, particularly in light of the fact that the framework is temporary, right? So the idea that we are sort of needlessly pushing and maybe counterproductively pushing against market-based restructuring of these industries is exaggerated, right? That fear of mine is exaggerated because, you know, it's temporary and the forces that are guiding industry are strong anyway, right? That is essentially the essence of your defense, so to speak.
Some additional comments that just to fine-tune what you say. I think that I think that yes, we need a structural change of the way we produce and the infrastructures that are where they are. I think that it could be much better public investment as such, that not state aid given in 27 different realities and depending on how much we count on. So regulation creates the condition to get into a markets-driven transformation, that's for truth, and they reflect in the final, the reflect of the cost in the final prices are of course very relevant measures to identify this happening. In the transition time there may be a need of justice and fairness that can involve the implication of public subsidies to facilitate this to happen or social policies for this to happen. And my main comment is that now that we care so much about security, physical security, which is so important, we should never forget that there is another very relevant aspect of security connected to the capacity to create wealth and the capacity to count on an inclusive and fair society that could respond in case we do not invest sufficiently in the transformation so to create the wealth. And I think that this is a little bit forgotten.
I agree. In fact, that's what used to be called economic security. In the olden days, that's what we meant by economic security.
Now maybe just to follow up on what we just discussed. I mean, the question, I think, is still a bit open about the ultimate nature of the clean industrial deal, not zooming out from state aid alone, looking also at the other instruments that are being rolled out and will be rolled out in the coming months. There is still a question on whether the clean industrial deal will be really a force to enable the industrial transformation we need in Europe, building on comparative advantages we have between European countries, but also with the outside world, on whether we have an initiative that is more targeted, also because of irresistible pressures from certain governments or certain industries, to basically do whatever it takes to retain the industries exactly where they are today and they have been in the past. So I think the jury is still a bit out on whether we are putting up a system to enable a transformation that maybe when you talk to certain industries is already happening, right? I mean, if you talk to the steel industries or other, they are already redesigning their supply chains according to the issue, you know, of comparative advantages that is there, and you need to adapt your economic model. But the political resistances, and I'm sure you feel this pressure, might be extremely strong, and therefore we might end up with providing some instruments that are really, at the end of the day, targeted to provide short-term relief. And I'm not only thinking about, you know, made in Europe provision that we might see in the coming weeks or months, but also about new financing schemes like the Industrial Decarbonization Bank, for instance, that we will set up next year. So how do you see this delicate balancing act actually at play in your daily life?
And that was the friendly question. I take note. No, thanks a lot.
He had a different question prepared.
It will come.
Well, I think that defines very well the type of tensions that we are living. Whether we keep a strategic view on how to transform the economy and to do it through our European dream, so doing it together, or whether we give up in the very short-term local temptations to facilitate status quo and to see how we can survive and navigate the very short-term pressures. And that is what it is building the context of today's discussions. And this is why I think it is very, very important to overcome. It is not that we can say, okay, we can forget about the short-term pressures and the chaos that we are experiencing in the global geopolitics. Of course, we cannot escape from that. But let's try to remain as consistent as possible when combining these short-term pressures towards preserving the long-term strategic views. And if we enter into that discussion, it is so obvious that we need to deepen into a much more collective and united approach and relevant strength. So it is not that the champions should be equally distributed everywhere and they should be supported by those that have money, or there are only the big ones having the right to count on champions. I mean, it's something that should be given by the market, but the market should count on the adequate regulatory and economic signals to get into that. And the other thing that I don't like is that, as you say, I think that there is a large number of companies in every single sector that may be willing to count on simplified regulatory context, but that are already making their own transformation. And suddenly we enter into a messy reality where we don't know what is the sense of direction. A kind of pendular swing where we don't know anymore if we are true to what we say that it was the right assessment, so to provide a new context of long-lasting prosperity and long-lasting industrial profits, or we are just trying to respond in a very hectic manner to the very short-term pressures. And this is the type of challenge that we need to solve in this moment of truth.
Just to remain on the challenges and on the trade-offs we are facing, just going to the first part of your title, the clean dimension. No? I think one of the big wins of the year was, in my view, certainly the 2040 target. I think we managed to get through a very ambitious 2040 target, 90% emissions reductions with the 5% flexibility when it comes to high quality international carbon credits. Now the question is, that's good, we have a solid target, but we also see that at the same time we are watering down, diluting or postponing some of the policies that are actually necessary to get to this target in practice. We saw that with ETS2, with a number of measures that have been simplified or deregulated, and maybe we might see next year a new fresh wave of attack on the ETS1 as well, in light of the review that will happen next year. So do you see this risk that while we stay firm on our climate trajectory, we are not really having in place all the instruments we need to get there because of the political pressures to dilute some of them, even touching the key pillars of our climate architecture like DTS?
So that's homework back to you, because now I'm going to comment on how much we need to develop the intelligent approaches on how to handle these things. I haven't heard, well, yes, I heard. There may be people even denying the fact that climate change is real, but there is not real opposition to the fact that getting into a decarbonized economy is a good idea. And that that creates the opportunities to enter into innovation in the field of industry, and that is a different reality in terms of economics, and that is part of the economic security approach. So I think that this is good. Then, yes, we've got this very important success, which is that, okay, we need to provide some predictability. 2040 is not so far ago, how we can create these reliable pathways for the time to come. And I think it is good how we can connect back to the international markets, because it is also not only a safety net, if I may say this way, but it is also a way to connect back to the multilateralism and to keep on building this other part of something which is very important for us, which is, okay, we want to build partnerships all over the world, and we want to enter multilateralism as a very relevant enabler of peace and development and cooperation. So I think that all that is part of the 2040 achievements that could be solved definitely in the coming days. But then we enter into how we combine the different pieces of a puzzle, where we have already achieved a lot. The low-hanging fruit has been achieved. There are things that we identify as possible that should not take such a big effort, but we know there is an increasing difficulty when we enter into the deep transformation across the board. And yes, we had a schedule. 2026 could be the right time to make an assessment on how to keep on thinking and building on the carbon price as a relevant means to get into this reality. And I guess, I'm sure that we will have to open a discussion on what is the adequate level of pricing to ensure the changes without creating undesired side effects, without imposing inflation or unaffordable cost for households, to what extent we need to combine with other tools, and it is not just a single approach that has been very effective for the time being for the high intense carbon facilities, but that may require to get into these very last steps to enter into different approaches. And I'm sure that this is going to be the discussion next year and the years to come. And I think it is fair. I mean, I could not support, not only politically, intellectually, I could not support, 300 euros to be imposed in cascade for consumers, households, industrial. That doesn't make sense. And there will be some taking lots of profits out of that, but it could be very unequal and unfair in terms of the distribution. So yes, I'm sure that we are going to enter into a new phase where we will need to combine the success of the ETS with other elements, and the discussion on what is the right level in terms of pricing to keep a signal, not to roll back, but at the very same time to achieve the final steps where probably the price signal could not be a fair manner to achieve the same goal.
Level or corridor for the price to fluctuate. I'm mindful of time, but I could not resist to ask you one question on the broader geopolitical context, since you mentioned that already in the speech. And I think over the last few weeks, we have seen some strong words from our American counterparts on the way we do economic policy here in Europe. I think we had last week the declarations by the US Secretary of Commerce that said that the US could modify its approach to steel and aluminum tariff if the EU reconsidered its digital rules. And I think what you said and what you announced this morning is a response to that. We had this week the US ambassador to the EU that wrote an op-ed in the FT suggesting the EU to repeal its growth killing, defined, so-called growth killing corporate sustainability due diligence directive, so to continue to have access to energy security. So standard enforcement of our rules, I understand from what you said, is one part of the answer to this, certainly, but then I would like to ask you, do we need to do something else? Does Europe in this very moment need to think about de-risking, or some would even go as far as saying decoupling strategy from the US? So how can we handle this difficult relationship we have with our possibly most important international partner?
Well, I heard a member of the European Parliament last week saying something that I loved. He said, we have underestimate the risk of a neighbor, overestimate the loyalty of our partner, and I could add, and we didn't realize that there were other people in the world with much hunger trying to do their best to promote wealth in their own countries. And that defines what is the geopolitical context. So yes, there are sufficient facts and lessons to be drawn to understand that we need to rebalance the way we relate to the rest of the world. But there are also sufficient provocative messages coming from people that we could have considered partners to say, hey, I take care of my sovereignty and my values, and I act according to the rule of law. By the way, do you act according to the rule of law? Then, yes, I guess that there may be lots of money behind this once and again repeated offer to provide more products from the United States towards Europe. I'm sure that there is a commercial interest behind that. That doesn't mean that it is something that is coherent with our own understanding of our own European interest. So I think that we all deserve some respect. And it is not only that we deserve respect, it is that I think that it is our responsibility and our duty to remind to the others that we deserve respect. I don't enter into how they regulate their health standards in the US market. But I am in charge of defending a well-functioning digital markets in Europe. And it is not related at all with any type of trade conversations. This is why I was very happy to read this morning that there was this comment saying, no, this is strong words. It's not blackmail. Oh, good. I'm happy to read it.
Reassuring step. Thank you, Executive Vice President. At this point, I think we can open up for questions from the audience. We can gather a few questions from the room, but also online. The hashtag in Slido is green transition. We are still a bit old-fashioned here. We call it still green transition, so rather than clean. So if you want to ask your question online is Slido, otherwise, and we have already a few of them, otherwise here in the room, don't hesitate. We see already one first raised hand there, so if you can just quickly introduce yourself, and then we might group a few questions. Huh? Yeah, please, just a second. Yeah.
Thank you. The Greens, the Socialists, and NGOs are all concerned that the Nature Restoration Regulation and the Urban Wastewater Directive will be in the upcoming environmental omnibus. Do you share these concerns? And maybe a second quick question. Under what form should it be included? Do you think it should be done under the form of stop the clock? Thank you.
So would you like to respond to this immediately?
Yes,
please.
It is
ahead,
very
yeah,
easy.
sure.
They will not.
Oh, that was quick. Other questions from the room? Otherwise, we have a few on. There is Heather. Perfect. Heather, thanks.
Thank you very much, Heather Graby at Bruegel. I'm afraid I have another question on the omnibus. So you rightly pointed out that it's not really clear where this method ends. We've taken extremely complex legislation and thrown it into the bear pit of European Parliament politics, and now there's huge regulatory uncertainty. So what happens if this method fails? What do we try next? And by failure, I would say either that we just can't get an agreement, even through trilogue, in the end, on something meaningful in terms of simplification, and it just ends up being de-scoping. Does that mean that then we simply reduce the scope of future legislation to the very largest firms, for example? Or does it mean that essentially this commission or the next commission will have to revise the legislation itself and put it through the normal legislative procedure?
Thank you, Heather. Please.
Oh, I think that it is under my responsibility not to anticipate those scenarios, to avoid failure, and there could be different ways of failure, but I think that for the time being, what we need to remind ourselves is that targeted simplification measures may be justified, but we need to be very careful on what Pandora box we may open. That could be my quick reaction.
I think there is a question online which allowed us to also discuss COP30, which we didn't do. So, of course, I mean, here is, they say disappointing COP30 now, that might be discussed. But what's your view on the achievement of the COP? And also, possibly, what's your view on the capability of the EU to exert effective leadership on climate action at the international stage while the member states are so divided on climate policy at home?
So I could make 3 comments. The first of them is that given the circumstances, the fact that it came up with relevant approaches supporting the need to keep on gathering and to keep on developing, including a map to phase out fossil fuels, being supported by a large number of countries, is good. I mean, it's not what I would have liked, but it is true that it is incredibly under pressure. I had never imagined that science, rationality, economic prosperity, economic security, business, fairness, so much was going to be under such a big pressure using fake data or just exercising aggressivity against this cooperative model. So I think that is my first comment. My second comment is that up to now, these gatherings have been useful for 2 things. The first of them is what is the regulatory framework that allows us to work along the same lines. And I have the impression that this regulatory framework is already in. There's not so much to be obtained from this type of gatherings when trying to get a negotiated outcome in terms of regulatory framework. It is a very important place for the second thing that has been able to deliver. The gathering place to understand, exchange views, perform, improve, and give orientation. And the funny thing, and this is something very precious, is that it has been a very creative innovation in the UN system, because it is not only diplomatic negotiators that gather to exchange views, is that the whole world community feel the need to gather at least once a year to exchange views. And that relates to mayors, think tanks, business community, investors, old fossil fuel people, new innovators in the energy field. And it is very interesting because it happens. If we could have wanted to create this in purpose, I'm not sure we would have been able to achieve this very same result. So I could not say that this is a failure. This means that things are changing on the ground and that people feel that this is important, whether they work in marine biology or they work in the infrastructure field. But I think that this is something to be preserved. On the lessons to be taken from this COP, I think it is so important to remain credible in action terms. And this is where the European Union needs to be sure that we can provide this credibility. And providing credibility means acting together, keep on diving on solutions, identifying the priorities. I'm happy to think about this energy policy as a driver to keep on building an union and a single market and an infrastructures that interconnects all of us. But I think that or the capital markets union that could help into lowering the cost for the innovations that we need to bet and back. So I think that now the questions are back on the ground action, both for resilience and adaptation, for ensuring water availability or not weaponizing on those raw materials that could help into the big transformation all over the world. That's a part of the criticism that I could raise. It is good to count on a great player in the world saying that they remain committed to the United Nations, and at the very same time, it is sad to see how they weaponize the materials that could help into the deep transformation all over the world. So I think that we need to set new context to keep on building in this global dialogue on climate action.
Thank you. And maybe if there are, well, I see that there are a few, so maybe we can start with the lady on the second row, if you can.
Muchas gracias. Laura from Vinces Consulting. I would like to ask you, Mrs. Ribera, how will you use merger guidelines to enable, rather than constrain, consolidation needed for European technological sovereignty in clean tech?
Thank you.
Very
So
much.
we can group a few questions. So there was another one here in front and then a second one there.
Kurt Geisert, I'm one of the guides in the House of European History. You spoke about reducing regulation, bureaucracy. We have the Acquis Communautaire with 70,000 pages in our museum. Are you optimistic that there will be results? Because one tried the whole thing 25 years ago with the help of Edmund Stoiber from Germany, and there was not much result.
Thank you. And then there was another question there. Thanks.
Federico Ravita, I work for the Community of European Railways at the moment, but the question is more personal. So because you mentioned critical raw materials at the moment, just a second ago, companies are restructuring their product design to avoid critical raw materials in their production lines, especially I think in the US, but I guess everyone is adapting. How can, let's say, state aid or different approach to R&D help European companies achieve that? And does that entail some sort of technological neutrality, which some, let's say, groups are trying to use to, let's say, use solutions that are not scalable, like biofuels, to use in wider markets and in sectors where decarbonization can happen in other ways? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, 4 minutes spanning from merger guidelines to critical raw materials. It's quite something.
Quite inspiring. So just to comment on this very last comment, I think that yes, we hear so much. I mean, I'm being used after 10 years to hear about technological neutrality, and I also add on climate neutrality too. So just to be sure that we speak the same language with thinking about technological neutrality. You enter into the raw materials, and I think that yes, in my third comment on, we didn't pay attention to many other countries in the world that were hunger for development and prosperity, and that were able to identify the mapping on where the key materials to enter into the new economy could be. And now we may be facing this weaponization of the availability of these raw materials. At the very same time, I think that we should be much more smart in the manner we handle the partnerships with those that may count on these raw materials. Because of course they want to use these raw materials to create opportunities for wealth and development in their own societies. And we Europeans could be saying, we are the high quality proposal to you, the reliable people committed to ensure fair, clean and just development in your own country and have these standards. But we need to be a little bit more on the ground and more effective, and not just a promise that ends in frustration. And I think that this is a joint exercise. Institutions together with business communities, and I think that we should succeed on this. Using public funding, blending, the risking, supporting a kind of big envelope on different proposals, I think that we could define all that. And it is a strategic approach on how we should be creators of new parameters and reliable partners in this new geopolitical context. Coming back to mergers, well, I think that the exercise is already launched. We intend to come up with the draft guidelines in the spring. I think that it is important to identify that the trade-offs and the understanding on how to combine the different elements within the discussion. What does it mean in terms of promoting innovation and avoiding killing innovation, having a dynamic understanding of the efficiencies of horizontal or non-horizontal cooperation, understanding that the market, the relevant markets may have evolved, and how we can provide upfront guidance and not just know this would not be allowed, but yes, this could be the way forward, is important. It is a sensitive exercise. We are working very hard in the services of the DG competition. We have regular meetings so to see and to assess what was commented during the public consultation. And my sense and my wish is to be sure that when we come up with the draft guidelines, it is something that may be respected. So there may be different views. Some will feel not so happy, but not because they do not respect the manner we provide solutions to the problems that have been identified, but because they disagree for whatever reason. So I think it is a little bit early to come back into the concrete answer to your question, but it is part of the ongoing process. And then, well, I hope not to send new pieces for the museum, but to try to come up with something that it is designed to serve and to be useful and to be used in an effective manner, facilitating, favoring quick capacities, evolving to the realities of today. And as I said, I think that the best thing is to be able to count on the experience and the minds of everybody in the room.
Thank you, Executive Vice President. Our time is over, so thank you for being with us. I think it was a genuine, nice discussion, and we look forward to welcoming you back next year. Thank you so much for being with us.